The Pleiadian Mission, A Time of Awareness by Randolph Winters. Chapter 3, The History of Humanity on Earth. Another part of the Pleiadian mission is to educate us about the history of humanity on Earth. Our written history is very short and incomplete and full of lies, and provides little information about the origin of humanity. It seems very unlikely that the many different races of Earth all naturally evolved here, yet we have no practical or scientific explanation of our existence here on Earth. Why are the Asians, Caucasians, Arabs, American Indians, and Africans, and so on, all so different? It just doesn't seem possible that we all could have evolved from the same monkeys. The differences between us have provoked prejudice and wars for thousands of years, and now that our weapons are getting more devastating, it's much more important than ever before that we learn to understand each other and come together as one people, the people of Earth. The Pleiadians tell us that it has been 626 billion years since the formation of the gas ball that eventually became the planet Earth. Most of that time has been spent evolving spiritual energy into a physical world that can sustain life. However, it has only been during the past 400 to 500 million years that human life on Earth has been detected. 400 to 500 million years that human life has been detected. Modern science believes that Homo sapiens, meaning wise man, first appeared around the Mediterranean about 500,000 years ago, and it's only been in the last 6,000 years or so that details of any kind have been recorded. Our current civilization has been but a brief period in the long history of Earth, possibly nothing more than the last second in a year-long lifespan. Anthropologists look for the explanation of our history on Earth through the study of plants, bones, artifacts, and relics left by earlier times. But the discovery of the origin of man is still a complete mystery left unsolved, for all the pieces cannot be found. The cutting edge of knowledge continues to change as we learn more and more about our stay on Earth. What is missing is the understanding of how life started on Earth, and how it has been manipulated and tampered and experimented with for many millions of years. Through the Pleiadians, we will discover how ancient travelers from many other worlds have come to Earth and settled here. At last, we will know how the many different colors, sizes, and races on Earth can be found in the history of the colonies that have settled on Earth from the past several million years from many different planets and solar systems. Most important are the colonizations during the past 100,000 years. The Pleiadians have studied all of the languages ever spoken on Earth for millions of years. They have records of the many different colonies that were founded here and blended together to make a very unique mixture of today's Earth human. We have not been left alone to evolve on our own as most planets have, but instead we are a mixture of many, many different races that have come from the stars over the millennia. It is this mixture of races that are all at different spiritual levels of evolution that has led to the difficult times we are now experiencing. Most planets have only one race, therefore they have fewer problems. Many warlike races have come here and contributed their DNA to our family tree and our bloody history. The unsolved mysteries on Earth. The unrecorded period of the history of Earth has left behind a myriad of unexplained mysteries on our planet, such as the pyramids, Easter Island, the ancient lines of Nazca, and many other unsolved riddles that are connected to our past. The explanations of these mysteries supplied by the Pleiadians will provide an understanding of man and how we came to be here. Once we can see ourselves within the rich history of our past, we will form a new view of our planet as humanity of Earth, instead of hundreds of independent countries fighting against each other for power and control. The Pleiadians tell us that their forefathers were our forefathers. We are both descendants of a race of people called the Lyrans, who have populated Earth on many occasions. It is because of this common ancestry that the Pleiadians see us as distant family and are trying to help us. Through a better understanding of our origins and how we have all come together, we can put together the pieces of our unique humanity. For we are about to move out into the universe and join up with the family of humanity that awaits us in the stars, but only once we have world peace. Contacting the minds of humanity. It is not clear as to how far the Pleiadians will go to interfere in our growth. The fact that they interfere at all gives us some level of insight into their moral values. They have admitted that about 100 years ago they enlightened some of us Earthlings in order to cause certain inventions to manifest that they felt were crucial. As to what these inventions are, we are not certain, but the method they use to transfer ideas is quite interesting. The Pleiadians see the culture of Earth as insane, rushing headlong to its own destruction, a destruction that can only be averted by a change in mass consciousness. They broadcast ideas, visions, thoughts, etc., at levels of consciousness that can be picked up by our subconscious as we sleep. These ideas become part of our dreams, and then we wake up with a great idea, having no awareness of its origin. This way, the Pleiadians do not feel they are interfering with our right of free will, for many people may pick up the ideas, but only a few will act on them, using their own initiative. In no case do they allow anyone to realize the origin of the thoughts, for that would interfere with our right to create our own future. They want us to be responsible for our own actions and to make decisions based on our own initiative. They have learned the hard way that it is better to conceal themselves and not let their presence be detected, since in the past when they did this on Earth and on other planets, it did not work out so well. They were sometimes revered as gods, feared as invaders, or found themselves in charge of a planet of helpless people who wanted to be cared for. Since none of these scenarios served their interests or the interests of the people of those planets, they have taken a very low profile on Earth at this time, and have tried to remain as undetectable as possible. Around the turn of the 20th century, a decision was made to start physical contact with someone on Earth. This had been tried several times before, but in most cases the person selected lacked sincerity and was not useful to the mission. The purpose of the mission was to see how humanity on Earth would react to the idea that they were not alone in the universe. The Pleiadians had studied the thoughts of people all over the planet, but we're not sure how most of the population would react to the thought of life on other worlds. For the most part, very few people at the time had given the idea of life on other planets much consideration. Life was hard, and most of their thoughts and energies were geared towards survival and taking care of themselves and their families. It was quite obvious that, with a few exceptions, nothing was known about the real meaning of life or spiritual growth. The decision was made to contact someone on Earth who would carry the message to the world that they were not alone. We are not told of the name of the lady chosen by the Pleiadians for this mission. This is just as well, since the plan did not work out. She was drawn into several physical contacts with the Pleiadians, and she was educated about other life forms throughout the galaxy and the development of life on Earth. She was asked to go public with the information to let people know what she had learned. Unfortunately, this experiment did not work out well. Her first attempts brought ridicule by her friends and family, and she was considered crazy. She quickly gave up the idea of speaking about her contacts out of fear for her life and her position in the community. People were not ready to open their minds to information that challenged the viewpoints of the powerful religions which completely dominated their thinking. It was quickly learned that the people of Earth were too insecure in their spiritual development to take responsibility for themselves. They found it easier to cling to old myths or folk stories of gods who would take care of them, providing an excuse for the many difficulties and problems in life. It seemed to be easier to say, "That's just the way God wants it," or "It's God's will," than to take responsibility for one's own decisions, mistakes, achievements, and doubts. The Pleiadians realized we were not ready, so they stopped the contacts and pulled back again into a position of observation. They didn't understand us as well as they had thought. The birth of Edward Albert Meier. It wasn't until the 1930s that once again the idea of physical contact with Earth was considered. Because of the change that humanity would be going through in the coming new age of Aquarius, it was becoming even more important that the people of Earth be awakened to the truth about the meaning of life and the existence of life on so many other planets in our galaxy alone. Earth was spiritually stagnant and controlled by the Darktilians of power and greed who caused wars to make money, placing the attainment of power and control over others above all else. Indeed, humankind was heading towards some hard lessons, and not only was not catching on, but humanity were becoming more like sheep, with no power to resist the farces of darkness and illogical thinking that ruled the planet. The time was 1937, and a decision was made to search the other side for the spirit form, the soul, that would have the ability to carry the message on Earth, and who would fearlessly break down the barriers of illogical thinking and spiritual darkness that plagued humankind. The highly advanced spiritual consciousness of the Pleiadians moved into a realm of the other side and found that old spirit form from the planet Lak'esh, bringing it back into life once again to serve as a prophet to the people of Earth and provide the knowledge to awaken the spirit of humanity. It happened on February 3rd, 1937 at 11 a.m. in Bulach, Switzerland. This date was Keen 5, Glyph 5, Tone 5, Empowering Serpent on the Divine Mayan Tzolk'in calendar. The soul from Lak'esh was born into the material world again and was named Edward Albert Meier. by his parents, who were simple farmers living by the land and the word of God. It had taken the control and thinking of 7 powerful spiritual leaders of the Pleiades to cause this reincarnation. Earth now had a new prophet. Born just 20 minutes later at 11:20 a.m. were 3 more souls who were to be helpful to this mission. They were also born in Europe and would live close to Edward, so they would be able to help him in his mission if he needed it. The plan was for Edward to be the physical contact, and the others would be contacted telepathically for the purpose of aiding Edward through the many difficult times that lay ahead. Not much is known about those other 3, except that 2 of them have died in car accidents. The 3rd person has chosen to remain anonymous. It was hoped that the knowledge the Pleiadians would impart to Earth through the new prophet would help humanity to better understand themselves and rise to new levels of consciousness. The current civilization on Earth had long lived in a self-contained sphere of ignorance, cut off from the knowledge of their ancestry and spiritual teachings of cosmic creation consciousness. This would be the most important time in humanity's history, for Earthlings would be gently awakened to the idea that they were not the only thinking human beings in the universe. It was a time of awakening for the people of Earth because they were about to rejoin the universal family of humanity after years of darkness, ignorance, and spiritual stagnation. It was a time of the Pleiadian mission. Contact from the Pleiades. As creation moved to allow the procreation of the old spirit-form soul into the world as Edward Meier, an unseen hand of Pleiadian consciousness gently guided the newborn infant into life. He would be watched over and cared for from his first breath. The importance of this new lifetime could not be understated, for the Pleiadians were aware of the difficult times to come in the new age. Through this new prophet, they would see to it that the wisdom of thousands of years of accumulated lifetimes would find its way into the hearts and minds of the people of Earth. Of the 7 Pleiadians who helped guide the old spirit-form soul into the world, one, an elderly man named Svath, decided to take on the task of watching over young Edward and seeing to his education. In each lifetime that the old spirit form had served as a prophet, it was necessary in the early years of material life to awaken his sleeping spiritual memories and bring forth the wisdom and abilities that would be needed to perform his mission. In this lifetime, it would be Svath's job to connect with the spirit-form soul who had become Edward and prepare him for the tasks ahead. Svath began to listen to young Edward's thoughts, which were just developing, but had no plans to make any contact with him for several years. However, at the age of 6 months old, Edward suddenly developed a case of pneumonia that seemed quite serious. For several days, Svath carefully observed Edward's health, which rapidly became very critical. His mother called in the family doctor. After a short examination, he informed Mrs. Meier that young Edward was in a coma and would probably not make it through the night. After the doctors left the house and Edward was left alone in his room, Svath decided to take matters into his own hands. Without the knowledge of Edward's parents, of course, Svath came into the bedroom and reversed the disease. By morning, Edward's health had returned. Mrs. Meier believed that her prayers had been answered and that a miracle had saved her baby, and she was right. She would never know that her home had been paid a visit by a kindly old man from another world. It wasn't until Edward was 5 years old that Svath decided to open contact with the child by stimulating his mind. At first, simple thoughts and ideas were telepathically sent to Edward, challenging him to try to understand their meaning and to respond. This was Svath's way of getting Edward to use his mind and wake up his old memories. It was easy enough to contact the spiritual side of Edward, but the material consciousness was not yet trained in how to use its spiritual self, so the telepathic thoughts went largely unanswered and uncomprehended. 2 years passed as Edward continued to receive thoughts from Svath without really understanding their meaning. He did not have the knowledge to comprehend the significance of the strange visions that had been flowing into his head. Svath had been monitoring Edward's thoughts and decided that now it was time to open up the spiritual side of Edward, bringing forth the old memories and knowledge that would help him interpret the meaning of these 2 years of transmissions. To do this, Svath sent the telepathic command to Edward to walk out into the forest near his home and wait for him. Edward had become accustomed to the telepathic voice by now and was not alarmed or intimidated, so he simply obeyed and went out into the woods and waited. Svath was high above the earth in his spaceship and could sense that Edward was responding to his request and was now waiting in the forest. The Pleiadian spacecraft was locked onto Edward's brain patterns and quickly darted down into the atmosphere of Earth and headed for Switzerland. Edward looked up and saw a small silver dot in the sky. It suddenly streaked toward him like a flash of light and quickly appeared on the ground as a pear-shaped craft. It was unlike anything he had seen before. The craft had arrived quickly without making a sound and gently set down in the meadow where Edward was waiting. From inside the ship, Svath had carefully scanned the area to make sure there was no one else around before stepping out of the craft. Edward seemed very calm for a young boy of 7 and followed Svath into his spaceship as he was directed. Within a few seconds, the craft left the Earth and was 40 miles up in orbit. There was no feeling of motion, so Edward had no idea where he was until he looked out a window and saw the Earth far below. Svath was expecting that a short ride in a Pleiadian craft would jar loose some of the old memories in Edward's mind, causing him to search himself for their meaning. Svath wanted him to discover for himself that he had lived many previous lives, during which he had ridden in similar spacecraft. Svath said not a word, but observed Edward's thoughts as the craft quickly returned to Earth and quietly settled back down on the same place. Edward was still speechless and seemed to be deep in thought. He had not said a word during the entire trip. Svath was content with the experience and knew that Edward's mind would be very busy making some old connections. Edward turned to look at Svath's ship, but it had vanished just as suddenly and silently as it had appeared. Edward was suddenly left alone in the forest to walk home with a lot of new ideas in his head. Ideas that would take quite some time to sort out. Over the next 2 years, Svath began to send telepathic messages more frequently, and Edward began to respond and offer answers to the many questions posed to him. He was beginning to remember many things and make many connections, but there was still a lot he didn't understand, of course. Svath could tell that Edward's mind was ready, and once again directed him to a meeting place at a remote spot in the forest at about age 9. This meeting would be different, for it was time to open up Edward's mind and let him know about his mission. he would have to decide for himself if he wished to continue it or stop, for Svath would not coerce him into a stressful lifetime as a prophet. In order for Edward to make an intelligent decision, Svath would first have to provide explanations and educate him in many ways. Once Edward was aboard the spacecraft and they were safely up in orbit above the Earth where nothing could disturb them, Svath began to explain to Edward that he could choose to prepare himself for a very serious and important mission. He would have to decide for himself whether or not he could bear the burden of this mission for which he had been selected and born. After long explanations, Svath placed a device on Edward's head which made a direct contact with his mind and unlocked many old memories and knowledge from past lifetimes and past lifetimes and past lifetimes. More importantly, he brought forward the awareness of the language of spirit that is deep within us all. This language of spirit is a language of symbols and signs and sacred geometry with which one can interpret the meaning of telepathic messages that are sent to the spiritual side of oneself. Within minutes, his inner standing of himself and his mission became clear. At this point, he made the decision to commit to his part in the mission. Happy that Edward had responded so favorably, Svath returned him to Earth. Edward now had the mental capacity of a 35-year-old man and would be able to understand the complex concepts of science and consciousness that he would now receive telepathically from Svath. He also possessed spiritual awareness and knowledge exceeding that of anyone else on Earth. That device that had been placed around his head while he had been on the ship had opened up his spiritual self and rekindled much of the old spirit's accumulated wisdom that dwelled deep within his mind from millions of years. Everything was in place now for Edward to learn and develop into the prophet of his time. After 2 more years of telepathic education from Svath and other extraterrestrials, Edward was told he would now be left alone for 11 years to mature and contemplate what he had learned. He was now 11 years old. He would need some time to himself, to travel, to meet his life partner, to start a family, and then settle down before the Pleiadians would rekindle the contacts. It was during these years that he lost his left arm in a bus accident in Iskenderun, Turkey, on the 3rd of August 1965. The Mayan Tzolk'in date of Kin 13, 13th sign, 13th tone, 13th glyph, 8 days after Edward's birth on the Tzolk'in, called Transcending Corn. Transcending pillars of light. Cosmic consciousness, pillars of light. This was an important event in his life, as it had been foretold to him by the extraterrestrials 7 years prior to its happening. Billy marks this event as part of his spiritual development and carries his remaining part of his left arm like a badge of honor. It was 1965, and the 250 Pleiadians who lived and worked in the vast underground complex under Switzerland had taken relatively little interest in the development of young Edward that had been left up to Svath. They had been busy with their normal duties of monitoring the thoughts of Earth's leaders and studying the effects of the new age on mass consciousness. Now it was time to choose someone to give Edward special attention and to prepare for the series of physical contacts that would be necessary to educate him as a prophet. Semjase prepares for her mission. A Pleiadian woman named Semjase volunteered to take on the mission of being Edward's teacher. She had never been on Earth and was not part of the underground complex team that had been observing Earth for the past 310 years. She was fascinated by the idea of working with the people of Earth. For her, it meant that she would have to learn a great deal about the planet, its history, science, languages, its people, and, of course, Edward Meier. Semjase lived on Era, the home planet of the Pleiades, where the level of consciousness was quite different from that of Earth. This would pose some problems for her, so she set about her task of preparation slowly and carefully. First, she studied the German language that was spoken by Edward. The information storage systems available to her in the Pleiades had on file the King's German that was spoken on Earth during the 16th and 17th centuries. This was very similar to the Swiss German that was spoken by Edward and would allow her to understand his thoughts once she began to monitor them. For the next 10 years, she studied the history of Earth and its people over the past several million years so that she could educate Edward. She would occasionally listen in on his thinking so she would be better prepared to communicate with him when the time came. Throughout all of this time, Edward was unaware that she was listening to his thoughts or that she was even studying him. During this time, Edward had taken on the nickname of Billy, a name he had picked up while watching American movies about Billy the Kid. Very fond of American westerns, Edward thought of himself as a cowboy and thus became Billy. He wore a cowboy hat and often carried a gun and holster just like his movie heroes, Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. In order to understand more about this fellow man and to learn about the many philosophies of life, Billy left Switzerland and traveled to the east to continue his education. As the years went by, he continued his travels through many countries, including India, Pakistan, and Greece, where he met and married a Greek woman named Calliope, who went by the nickname of Poppy. They returned to Switzerland, to the town of Hinwell, to start their family. Employed as a night watchman, Billy used his time alone to study the many lessons of life that he had learned over the years in preparation for his mission. He practiced meditation constantly in order to gain access to the spheres of higher consciousness. Svath had made many references to the past lives that had been lived by Billy's spirit, encouraging him to find out about them for himself. Through meditation, it was possible for him to connect with his spiritual self, the doorway to the memories of former lifetimes and the lessons learned. Billy, however, was very puzzled by the idea that he had lived previous lives as a prophet, serving the Pleiadian mission every time, and gave much thought to unraveling this mystery. Billy's first contact with Semjase. Semjase was comfortable with her mission and the knowledge she had acquired and felt she was ready to start the contacts. Just before leaving for Earth, she spent a few days practicing with a language specialist to brush up on the King's German, and then she was ready. It was on Tuesday, the 28th of January, 1975 at 1 p.m. Earth time when Semjase sent her first telepathic message to Billy. This is Keen 98, Reflecting Obsidian Mirror Knife. Billy was working at home with his tape recorder, trying to capture the voice of spirits. He had been trying for months with poor results when her thoughts suddenly came into his mind. She was directing him to get his camera and meet her at the remote spot. She was directing him to get his camera and meet her at a remote spot to which she would lead him. She could tell by his thoughts that he was surprised. They didn't know each other yet, for she had not introduced herself or made her presence known to him during the years she had been studying him. Part of his surprise was that he was not expecting contact for another year, but the thoughts in his head made it quite clear that he was being led into a remote area for a meeting with a visitor from another world. As the silver spacecraft floated high above the Earth in the clear Swiss sky, she continued to send telepathic messages to Billy, guiding him into the remote forest area. He had driven through a small village and, within minutes, was heading into a local forest. As he rode his small moped along the lonely road, he once again felt the thoughts of Semjase come into his mind and guide him to move on down the road to a more remote location. Looking at his watch, he noticed it was 2:12 p.m. and that he had been driving for a full hour. Contact from the Pleiades. In her telepathic messages, Semjase suggested that Billy bring his camera, for she was going to allow photos to be taken of her spacecraft as proof of her existence. It had been decided by the Pleiadian Council that the main purpose of their first visits would be to provide evidence of their existence. It was time to awaken the people of Earth to the idea that they were not alone. In the past, they had made contact with other Earth people for the purpose of making their presence known, but had not allowed any photos to be taken. At that time, they were concerned that this would have been taking the proof of their existence too far, causing undue mental stress on some people. They had to be more careful of the manner in which they exposed themselves to the masses of Earth, and it was clear to them after years of study that the minds of most Earth people at that time were too fragile to handle the ideas of visitors from another world. Now, however, they felt the time was right to allow photos of the craft to be gentle. Now, however, they felt the time was right to allow photos of the craft to gently awaken us to the idea that we are not alone in the universe. From out of the clouds, Semjase guided her ship and hurried toward the meeting place in the quiet meadow of the Swiss countryside. Even though the ship was very quiet and flew noiselessly, Billy noticed the rustle of the birds and wildlife. Boop! Even though the ship flew noiselessly, Billy noticed the rustle of the birds and wildlife that signaled the approach of the alien energy to the forest. He parked his moped by a tree and stood motionless as the sleek silvery craft set down in the remote meadow. As soon as the UFO had landed, Billy walked toward it to observe it more closely and to get a better photograph. But about 100 meters before reaching the UFO, he was stopped by some unseen force. It felt like he was pushing against the winds of a completely soundless storm. With all his power, he tried to fight against the energy field to move forward, but could only advance a few feet because the counteracting force was simply too great. Billy decided to sit down on the ground, stare at the spaceship, and wait for the occupant to come out. Semjase could tell that Billy was mentally calm and was prepared to greet her, so she opened the hatch to her spacecraft and stepped out onto the ground. As she walked toward him, she could tell his thoughts were all about her appearance. Billy was thinking her clothes were rather familiar. A cosmic suit, similar in form to some earthly products, but a very pliant and light material, he analyzed. Actually, the suit was more like an overall with a peculiar gray color. Very close up, it reminded him of the skin of an elephant, which he had seen once in Africa and again at a zoo in Switzerland. The suit fit tightly to the body and appeared to be quite durable. Around her neck was a metal ring, apparently for the purpose of fastening a helmet of some type. Evidently, the Earth's atmosphere was very suitable for her, for she never required a helmet during her visits to Billy. As people tend to do, Billy was quickly looking her over and forming his opinion of her. His head was exposed. Boop! Her head was exposed, and she was easily recognized as being a young woman. The look on her face was free and open, with nothing to suggest that she was superhuman or carried a superior attitude. Her manner was that of a normal-looking human being who just happened to be of extraterrestrial origin. Billy could not ignore the fact that she was also very beautiful. Her walk was that of a normal person, only stronger and more self-assured. Her long red hair shone in the sunlight as she stopped in front of him. Slowly she extended her hand to Billy, seized him by the arm, and pulled him up on his feet. Her grip was strong and sure, but very pleasant and confident. They walked towards Billy's motorbike, where they both just sat down in the dry grass. Then she began to speak, not in his home language of Swiss German, but in the older King's German that she had learned. This caused her to have an accent that was peculiar to him, but he had no trouble understanding her. Semjase introduced herself, explaining that she was from a small cluster of stars that humans called the Pleiades. She told him that she had been listening to his thoughts for several years in preparation for this meeting and understood his character very well. She knew that Billy was a fearless man whose integrity could be counted on. She told Billy to relax, and he already was, and that today she had information to impart and to only interrupt her if he did not understand something. She promised there would be more meetings in the future, and he could ask all the questions that he wanted. But today, for the first meeting, she simply wanted to introduce herself and let him know what to expect in the future. To begin with, she said, she and her people were concerned that so many people here on Earth were claiming to be in contact with the Pleiadians and claiming to have ridden in their beam ships, as she called them. This was completely false, for the Pleiadians had not conducted any physical contacts with any other Earth people for hundreds of years. The same held true for certain other UFO organizations which had been trying to gain knowledge about their beam ships, but they had no photos that were really authentic. There are many photos in existence which appear to be extraterrestrial craft, but which are really nothing more than blurred lights. Most of the photos were nothing more than fabricated deceptions manufactured by dishonest people seeking wealth and fame. Semjase wanted to make it clear to the people of Earth that her people had been coming to Earth for thousands and thousands of years and were not involved directly with the governments or political leaders. Only occasionally do they make contact with a chosen person such as Billy, and then it is only for the purpose of awakening people to the idea that they are not the only thinking rational beings in the universe. Another point she wanted to make clear was that she and her people were not superhuman and do not have supernatural powers. Laser beams do not shoot from their eyes, and they do not have the strength of 10 humans. In truth, they are just human beings, the same as the people of Earth. But their knowledge and wisdom is far greater, especially in the technical and spiritual areas, because of natural evolution. It is their highly developed spiritual knowledge that enables them to use certain powers of spirit that seem like magic to us, such as telepathy, telekinesis, and access to higher realms of consciousness. These abilities all lie within humans on Earth, but they are just not very well developed in most people. However, all of the clairs are coming online for everyone who is ready. We should also be made aware, Samjase warned Billy, that there are many deceitful people on Earth who pretend that they are in contact with human beings from other planets in our own solar system, and they even claim to have flown in their spacecraft. This is also not true, for the planets they talk about are so desolate that human life is impossible there. Other planets, in contrast, have been lifeless for a long time, or are in the first stages of development and do not support life in any form. There is no human life in our solar system, except here on Earth, and a few scattered bases manned by the Pleiadians and other races. Other solar systems beyond ours do exist with various forms of life, and not exclusively human. There are also many animal and even plant life forms that have evolved into higher forms of consciousness. It was time for the people of Earth to know that many life forms exist who have reached advanced knowledge and travel throughout the universe, sometimes visiting Earth. Many of these otherworld travelers are malicious and should be considered very dangerous. Sometimes they will even destroy whole planets or civilizations and force the inhabitants into slavery. Part of her mission was to warn the Earth humans about these creatures because the time rapidly approaches wherein face-to-face conflict with some of these beings might become unavoidable. Another part of her mission, and Billy's, was directed towards our religions and the consequent suppression of the development of the human spirit. In future meetings, she wanted to spend some time in the education of spiritual matters, so the people of the Earth could learn about the one power that resides over the life and death of each creature in existence. This is the cosmic creation consciousness that dictates the logic by which the universe and all life forms exist. This logic is absolute and forms the laws by which man must live. These laws are apparent in nature and reveal the knowledge of life and the direction towards spiritual greatness, which embodies the goal of existence. It was time for the Earth human to learn about the true nature and meaning of life, and how to live in peace and harmony with nature and each other, and the eternal energy of cosmic creation consciousness. These would be the subjects of many of the future meetings between Samjase and Billy. By studying the thoughts of Earth, the Pleiadians have also discovered that we are living under the wrong idea that gods are equal to the cosmic creation consciousness itself. We humans have often misled ourselves into believing that an Earth human by the name of Emmanuel or Yeshua was the Son of God and the Lord of the universe. In future contacts, Samjase would explain in detail the roles of gods within cosmic creation consciousness and provide us with the real truth about the life and teachings of Emmanuel or Yeshua, whom we call Jesus Christ. One further point in this area was that the Pleiadians and other extraterrestrial races have not come to Earth on behalf of a god to bring the Earth long-awaited peace. Earth humans must learn that never can a god take the role of cosmic creation consciousness or control the destiny or fate of any human race on any planet. A god is simply a physical being, a governor, and, moreover, a human being who has evolved to a level of great understanding and knowledge through millions of lifetimes and potentially billions of years. Gaining power through this knowledge, these beings usually exercise control over their fellow creatures. Those that are significantly less developed will believe that these self-styled gods have power over their lives, but they do not. Cosmic creation consciousness is the spiritual force that has the knowledge to create multiple universes, whereas a god is only a material being with knowledge of the human form and mind, and is subject to cosmic creation consciousness just like all other life forms are. It was also not true that the Pleiadians came to Earth on behalf of any of those gods, for they are no longer governed by any gods or rulers and now live completely free, enjoying their personal spiritual connection with cosmic creation consciousness. They are, each one of them, holy holograms of sovereign divinity. The cosmic creation consciousness itself never gives commands or demands worship in any fashion because it is completely egoless. It is completely non-judgmental, spiritual force. It is eternal knowledge that guides the growth of the universes, and that knowledge is never in need of commands or religions or praise or worship or gifts. The Pleiadians would like to bring this truth to the light of the world and make it known to human beings. It is an important part of their mission. If this does not happen, then it is possible that humankind will slowly destroy itself, or fall further into complete spiritual darkness. Samjase then reconfirmed that there would be many more meetings, and she planned to spend a lot of time with Billy to pass on the information the Pleiadian Council felt was important for Earth. She had prepared for the coming contacts for several years and had great hopes that the information she would provide would be useful in helping the people of Earth create a more peaceful future. Her objective on that day was only to introduce herself and let Billy know of her plans for the future. This would be all for their first meeting, and he could plan for her return within a week. She would contact him when she was coming, just as she did that day. He would feel a cooling sensation on his forehead, followed by the telepathic transmission of thoughts that would let him know where to meet her. She would be careful to interrupt his thoughts only when he was open to it, and not to infringe upon his privacy. Future contacts would be in her beam ship, so they would have some privacy. She also intended to take him on flights into free cosmic space, so he could visit the other planets and see the solar system. It was okay for him to bring his camera, for they wanted to encourage him to take many pictures and bring them to the attention of the public. She would be more helpful in the future, posing her ship so that she could give some very good shots. Bidding Billy farewell, Samjase then walked toward the spacecraft that was sitting there quietly in the meadow, disappeared inside the craft, and flew away within seconds. Billy took advantage of the opportunity and snapped several more photos as the ship disappeared over the forest. He knew from previous experience that you had to be quick if you wanted to get good pictures of these spacecraft, because they changed direction so quickly and disappeared in seconds. Just as Samjase had said, she began to return almost every week. Each time she would send the telepathic message to Billy, guiding him to a remote spot where they would be unnoticed. Billy would ride his moped to where he was directed and wait for the silver craft to show up. On most occasions, she would bring him up into the beam ship, especially since the Swiss weather can be so harsh most of the year. Here they could talk and have their meetings in private, and she shared with him the vast amount of knowledge that the Pleiadians felt was important for Earth. After each meeting, or contact as Billy called them, he would return home and type out what was said. Not trusting Billy's memory, Semjase had arranged for a special computer-like device to replay to Billy's mind all that was said at each contact, so that he could type it down exactly. The device could read the memory of the meeting that was stored in the subconscious mind of Semjase and send it to the conscious mind of Billy, who is sitting at his typewriter. He would then hear the conversation in his head and type it. This was particularly hard for Billy, having only one arm, and made the job of typing very difficult. During the transmissions from Semjase, he would sit at the typewriter and be capable of typing 50 to 60 words a minute without stopping. He would normally have someone sitting beside him to change the paper as the continuous stream of knowledge flowed from his mind out onto the typewriter keys. This process would usually last for several hours, until either the transmission was complete or he was exhausted. The amount of work became overwhelming to Billy. He was having a contact almost every week, and at the same time he was a father and a husband who needed to provide for his family. His wife, Poppy, had 2 kids, a house, and a husband to take care of, and she wasn't in the mood to hear that Billy was too busy having contacts with a nice-looking woman from another planet that he had no time to work. It was several months before she began to take his contacts seriously and started to understand their importance. At each contact, he would usually get the opportunity to bring his camera and shoot 2 or 3 rolls of film. Semjase wanted Billy to get the best UFO shots ever taken, as proof to the public that his meetings and information were real. She and the members of the High Council of the Pleiades, to whom she had to answer, felt that many people on Earth were ready to take this step up in their consciousness. The pictures would be proof to some, and to others it would open up old memories of life on other worlds where ships such as these were common. Semjase was well aware that there were many old Lyran spirits on Earth who had lived many lifetimes on other worlds far more advanced than Earth. Billy's pictures began to appear in magazines and newspapers in Switzerland and surrounding countries. They were all beautiful daytime photos that were very clear and distinct. They were so good that many people couldn't believe that they were real. But many of those who did believe came in droves to Billy's home in Hinwell. On Sundays, the road to his house was packed with cars from all over, for everyone wanted to talk with the man who was in contact with the star people. Billy had made a promise to Semjase to tell everyone about his contacts, and he would refuse no one. He underestimated the scope of his promise, for people came by the thousands to ask their questions and look at his spectacular photos. His home life was ruined as people crawled through the windows, went through his drawers and stole his pictures, and made life miserable for him, Poppy, and their children. The local townspeople were also getting fed up with the traffic and commotion. Most of the villagers didn't believe his story and thought he was some kind of con man who was making this all up. They didn't think this was amusing at all and wanted him out of town. It wasn't long before Billy was forced to look for a new place for himself and his family to live. They found a nice old farm in a remote area of the countryside that Semjase pointed out would have a good chance of surviving the coming disasters around the turn of the century. On a viewing screen in her ship, she showed Billy the areas of Switzerland that would be most affected by the coming volcanoes, fires, and more importantly, the rising water that was expected from overflowing oceans. These events would be happening around the advent of the 21st century. The farm was in a safe place in a little rural area called Schmidruti, about 45 minutes east of Zurich. Here, Billy could live peacefully and continue his work safe from the coming natural disasters. Buying the farm was expensive, especially since Billy had no income other than the pension he received from the Swiss government. He would need some financial help from others in order to buy the farm. As luck would have it, an old friend came forward just at the right time and was able to offer enough money for a down payment on the farm, and things fell into place for him to move his family to their new home. Over that year, many of those who had come to visit him had expressed interest in helping him with his work of disseminating his informative contact notes to the public. So far, by that point, Billy had amassed over 1,000 pages of contact notes he had written of his meetings with the off-world visits from the Pleiades. The information included was on many different subjects, from history to science to consciousness. Semjase had been prompting him for months to get his notes in order and to make them available to the public, and she was most adamant that Billy should speak in public. All of this was proving to be too much for Billy, however. He just couldn't keep up with the workload, and public speaking was very difficult for him. He had tried on a couple of occasions to speak to small groups in neighboring cities, but he was ridiculed and laughed at, and wanted no further part of it. Once the move to the farm at Shmidruti had been accomplished, Billy decided to take Semjase's suggestion that he form a group around him that could help him with his work. They could help him with his contact notes and other books he was writing, and possibly public speaking. Billy approached some of his followers who were most anxious to help out with the work, and a group was formed. They called themselves Free Community of Interest in Border and Spiritual Science and UFOlogy. There were 25 members in the original group, 15 of whom took up residence at the farm where Billy and Poppy had just moved with their children. In order of the special purpose of this new home they would all share, they decided to name the farm the Semjase Silver Star Center. The German abbreviation for the name was the FIGU, and the FIGU members then began to take part in helping out around the Star Center, or the Center as they called it, and took on special duties to help Billy with his writing. Some of the FIGU members helped edit his books, while others answered letters from around the world, and some took day jobs in town to help out with the money. All in all, life was starting to become easier for Billy, and the Semjase Silver Star Center was becoming well known around the world and off the world.